Good evening. I'm Corrine Salcedo, Chair of Fidalgo Democrats. Now that the election is mostly over, we can turn our attention to how Republicans and Democrats might work together. So we have Professor Kurt Dunbar, who's going to talk about regaining civil discourse. And I'll introduce him in a few minutes. I say mostly over because, as you know, Donald Trump is refusing to concede. Many of us know a bipartisan national coalition of over 100 organizations formed in anticipation of this. Over 500 communities planned Protect the Results events, including Anacortes and Mount Vernon. There were over 150 who signed up in Anacortes for the November 4th rally, and 125 signed up in Mount Vernon for their event. Or count every vote, we called it. Because Protect the Results, but the Protect the Results Steering Committee discussed the morning of November 4th and from all sides, and then voted to not activate the events because for several reasons, because the media did not take seriously Donald Trump's victory speech, and because counting the vote was proceeding normally as it should, and because there was concern about violence at the local events. Local people had concern, including here too. So it was called off, but now that he's refusing to concede, we need to consider whether to yet activate. And so our local planning group has to decide this. If you want to weigh in on it, you can email me with your opinion. We don't have any public officials or candidates here tonight or yet who would want to say hello or give the status of their race. So we'll go ahead. I'll introduce, well, first I'll tell you, Brad Kleur of Skagit Dem Zoom Support is our Zoom host, and he's recording the meeting. And Zane Butler, our videographer, will make a YouTube video of the recording. And when I receive the link, then I'll send it out to our email list. So I'll introduce Professor Kurt Dunbar. He lives in Bellingham. He has a BA and an MA in history. He began teaching at Skagit Valley College in 1997. And he teaches American history, Western civilization, world civilization, Pacific Northwest history, contemporary global issues, American government, international studies, and modern Middle East history. He's traveled to Mexico, Hong Kong, China, Mongolia, Great Britain, and lived for a time in Canada. And since 1996, he has worked summers on big cruise ships as a naturalist and an outboard lecturer in Alaska. So he's a busy fellow. And he's involved in the peace and justice community in Bellingham, and also regularly participates in the longest continuous peace vigil in the US, which now has been going for 54 years. Please hold your questions until he's finished speaking. Professor Dunbar, go ahead.
Hi, Corrine, thank you. And thanks for the invitation to speak tonight. I didn't really prepare anything, a program or presentation. I thought I would let it sort of go stream of consciousness in the form of questions and answers and discussion, and dialogue. I spouted off there prior to you initiating the meeting, about some of the things that I wanted to discuss in the context of current politics and civics and civility. And I link that for those of you who didn't hear that spiel. I very much would have titled, if I'd done a talk tonight, you can't have civility without civics, or vice versa. we have to understand how we operate as a society, the constitutional uh, history and traditions and law that we have, that we operate as a society, are what that is the bare bones of who we are as a people. And if we're not cognizant, if we're not really aware of all of those things, then we're just sort of talking past each other. I'm going to keep this on the subject of civility, and I think listening is important, and I think it's going to become critical here in at least in the near future, probably forever, and more so than ever. But I think at the same time, we can't we can't accommodate what we can't accommodate, and I think there's a matter of just having to agree to disagree, but that has to be mutual. I would have one question that I would like everybody to think about tonight, is that we're all concerned citizens. We're here tonight, you're listening to me, we're going to have discussions about our deep concerns for the state of things, for the state of our society and American politics, and how to make that better, and how to reach out to those that we are going to be fighting with here in a few weeks at the Thanksgiving table. Count on it. But I would pose the question to all of you is, are those who we disagree with having this same conversation? Are they asking themselves the same question? How can we accommodate those we disagree with? And I think we'll all come up with our own answers on that. And I'm not so sure I can answer in the affirmative. I hope. I think the great hope for all of us is that we all start listening to each other, including those we deeply disagree with. And I tell my American government students that there are three things essential to American democracy. It is the genius of American politics, and it's the only way it has existed and thrived for the last 250 years. And it's summed up in three words: compromise, compromise, compromise. It's not an easy pill to swallow sometimes, but it's necessary for democracy to function. I get a lot of emails from a lot of friends, like teach politics and history, and they want my opinion or they want to pick a fight. That's okay too. And sure enough, I got an email from a good friend, a rabbi, the other day, and he was just grousing about how chaotic and crazy American politics is. And I said, yeah, it's built that way. That's in the DNA of American democracy. Get used to it. I think one of the things I do with students first day in a political science class when I'm lecturing to them is to tell them, it's built in. The frustrations that we have with government are deliberate. Democracies aren't supposed to run smoothly. Tyrannies do. Authoritarian states run smoothly. One guy tells everybody what to do and they do it, or they go to prison or worse. It's different in democracies, and we have to understand that. Essentially, it is the core of democracy is the multiplicity of ideas, the diversity of opinion, and the tolerance and the understanding of how that works. That's civics. That's the beating heart of American citizenship. Is respect for your opponent's ideas, and we've seen this. I've seen some great cuts on the news that showed George H. Bush welcoming the Clintons into the White House during the transition period. The same thing when Clinton did it to George Jr. When Obama did it for Trump. And now we've got this. This is so against our core civic ethos that I don't think most Americans understand the turning point that we're at if we accept this as the norm. And it's going to be hard to compromise on these things, because what we're asking really is to give up what has worked for American democracy for the last 250 years. This kind of division, this kind of polarity in American society cannot persist. It can't stand, and it's either going to reach a crisis point, or we're going to have to develop skills and tools to get along with each other. And for me, as an educator, that's target rich, that's job security, that's what I do, and that's what we're going to have to do with each other. But being willing to listen, I think, is going to be a big part of it. Any comments or questions on them?
Well, I asked them to wait till you were finished, so. But Art Fine has his hand up. So go ahead, Art.
Well, I've had a couple of questions, but Kurt, thank you for your comments. I am a charter member of Civility First on Whidbey Island. So I'm really not a Fidalgo Dems person, but I have been a fan of Corinne for a long time. My question stems from, and I'm not really sure how to ask it, but how do you deal rationally with irrational behavior? How I see the Donald Trump is one thing, but Donald Trump supporters personify cult behavior as I see it. And my question is, how do we deal civilly in a discussion with somebody whose facts are totally contrary to what we understand to be factual? If I'm trying to talk about climate change with somebody who says man has had no impact on climate change, any change in the climate is a function of God. How do you deal civilly with someone who's so, Democrats run a QAnon theory. Democrats run a child pornography scheme and eat their babies. How do you deal rationally? How do you deal civilly with someone that takes that position?
I'm lucky in a way. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
In the classroom, I have some measure of control over the way that a debate goes. If somebody is being irrational, I can stop them and say, "Well, prove your point." You know, as a teacher, it is a power situation, and I try not to abuse it. But it's really great because for me, it's an ideal environment to learn, is to make people prove what they think. Why do you believe that? Bring your evidence to bear, and I can make them do that. We don't have that luxury with our friends and family and fellow citizens whom we can't have a rational discussion with. So we have to fall back on, I think, on patience, which, by the way, anybody who knows me is a quality I lack in spades. I'm not a patient person, but I think we're all going to have to practice it to some degree. There's a lot of behavioral science now coming out on this type of thing, on embracing irrational thought. embracing conspiracy theories, embracing ideas that are not supportable, sometimes just downright loony. And a lot of the data is coming from the new social media and how people are interacting on social media. And the two are very, very much connected. Social media now has been around pretty intensively, available to most people for 20 years, closer to 30. And they're noticing patterns. There are many now who have developed social media platforms who've said, my God, what have we done? We have created a monster. They don't let their children go on social media because it appeals to this sort of lizard brain element of humans, this emotional element of human thinking or human feeling that is impervious to logic and to rationality. And so techniques now, the more we're learning about this, again, thanks very much to studies of social media and how people behave on it, ways of sort of remedying that impasse with people and discussions. But it's not easy. It's very, very difficult. And we have to practice things that often we're not used to doing. I know as a teacher, I like using logic, rationality, proof, substance. And those are, as you just described, are tools that we find frustratingly useless. And so we've got to develop other techniques. And the things that I've been watching on studies of social media and how we've come to this polarization is basically listening. It's hard. I'm not a listener. I'm not a good listener. I never have been. That's why I'm a teacher, I guess. I like to pitch. I don't catch very well. But I think we ought to practice it a little bit. And it's very hard. And it's really hard when we hear ideas that we know aren't true, or that we deeply disagree with, that may be true, but we don't agree with it, and still have to listen. And it's on that very, very tender common ground of listening, of hearing somebody out, no matter how strongly we want to argue with them, that then you can start to perhaps have a rational conversation. But just a clash of ideas is just people yelling past each other. Nobody hears anything. I tend to be drawn into emotional arguments. And so I have trained myself over the years to back off, to not come in with sharp weapons. Now, I admitted earlier, I teach with a meat axe, but that's because I have a power advantage in the classroom. I can come at a thing. I do encourage discourse and disagreement in class. I try to. I think I'm a little intimidating, and students don't do it as often as I would like them to do, or I encourage them to do. But I make them prove their point. I won't let them get away with some kind of false statements, some of this moonbat stuff that's floating around that they're looking at in their little device, what I call rectangular world. And it's kind of, we have to all kind of break ourselves of those habits. And I think people of both poles, both political persuasions, progressive and liberal, conservative and Republican, we both tend to get caught in echo chambers. We get caught in our own bubbles and the reinforcement of our own ideas. And I think we have to consciously work at trying not to insulate ourselves too much in those cocoons, in those bubbles, in that echo chamber. And again, as I asked earlier, I think we all kind of understand this and we're willing to do it. Hell, we're progressives, we're Democrats. I'm, by the way, not a registered Democrat. I've been an independent my whole life. And but my politics tend to lean in that direction. In fact, I'm too far to the left for most Democrats. But it's a matter of training ourselves to not jump to the bait and not want to win an argument. I had a little aha moment. I was in the airport. I was at SeaTac, and I was flying with my students to Nashville for a big honors convention. And we were stuck in a layover there for a while. And this guy was having, you're next to somebody who's having a conversation on the phone, and they're talking way too loud. You can hear everything they're saying. I tend to talk loud on the phone. My wife's always telling me to tone it down. I guess because I'm getting old and deaf, and I think they can't hear me. They can hear me fine, but he was having this argument with somebody on the other end, and I couldn't help but listen. But we were politely ignoring, like we tend to do, and not eavesdrop. But then I heard him say it, and it was a real moment for me. And he said, "Well," he goes, "I gotta say, I don't agree with you." And the argument had been heated for a while. And then he said, "I would rather be kind than right." And I just thought, that's the most amazing thing I've heard. And I went and looked it up on the internet. And it turns out the Dalai Lama, that comes from the Dalai Lama. And I think we should all practice more to be kind than right. We know we're right. We don't have to prove it to everybody. We're not missionaries out there to convert everybody to our way of thinking, to our point of view. And I think we need to be kind enough to listen. So try to be more kind than right. It sounds simplistic. I'm not one for airy-fairy new age thinking, but it made a lot of sense to me, and it may be one of many strategies for us to practice to start to stand down from the polarity, to start to see all of our fellow citizens as just that, as the common weal. We're all in this together as Americans, and I think that's a good place to start. Any other questions, comments?
I've got one.
Okay, Carol Sullivan.
Okay, thank you. It's just, I'm curious about an opinion, really. I'd like an opinion from you. If you could fix, well, I'm going to assume that there are some things wrong with democracy. We're seeing some of the things happening, in our situation in this political season that are wrong with democracy. If you could fix just one thing about our democracy, our politics, our democracy, as we have it now, what would you change, or what would you fix? How would you fix it?
I think there are a lot. There are a lot of. I have a list actually.
Well, go ahead.
At the top of the list, if you ask for one, I think at the top of the list.
More is okay. More.
Well, I can tell you more, but at the very, very top of the list, I think if we could only do one thing, if I were president for 10 seconds and I could pass one law, it would be to remove money from politics completely. Publicly funded elections. Money is the mother's milk of politics today. And it's also the great cause of the evil in our politics, the corruption. Money in politics is corruption, almost by definition. And if we could drain off that pus, that money from the political environment, publicly, 100% publicly funded elections, from dog catcher to president, that would go very, very far, I think, in taking out the corrupting element of money. Part of that too, and it's connected to it, is well, how do we get our message out? We need money to so we can espouse our platform and what we're running on. Fine. When in the 1930s, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt came into power and he began to pass all of the various aspects of the New Deal, one of the most brilliant, one of the most beneficial to American society was to create the FCC, the Federal Communication Commission. and it monitored and regulated and licensed media outlets. At the time, it was just radio. And there was a practical reason for doing it in that radio stations, a rich guy could build a huge transformer and blot out the wavelength, the signal of every radio around him. It was easy. All you had to do was have the bigger transformer. That wasn't fair. So they evened the playing field by saying transmissions can only be so powerful. It broke up the band of AM at the time so that the powerful stations were spaced far apart on the dial so that they didn't drown each other out. That was one way of evening the playing field with media, but what developed from the FCC was the core idea of the commons, of wavelengths, of airwaves, of radio being essentially the commons, and licensing. Okay, you can have a radio station, you can have a large transmitter, you can have whatever content you want, but you have to give a certain percentage of that back to the public. If you're going to use a public commons, the airwaves, which is licensed and controlled by the FCC, and some people would say socialist, and I suppose that it is, then you're going to have to devote part of that. You can make a lot of money, but you're going to have to take 10, 20% of what you do and devote it to public service announcements. This is where the whole idea of public service announcements came from, is whether it was for the Red Cross or whether it was for charitable organizations, or in the political season for candidates to come on and have debates or have a 1-minute spot in which they could talk about their platform and what they were running on. So the mechanism's already there to allow for those ideas to go through media, through TV now, and also through social media, and still radio. So you're not cutting anybody off, and there would be no advantage of money-wise. So people wouldn't be going out and trying to have billion-dollar war chests for their campaign funds so that they could have more airtime than the next guy. This sort of makes it so that everybody has access to it, because it's a commons, because the FCC can demand that radio stations, if they want to keep their license, they have to allow candidates to come on the air during the political season. So in a way, that takes money out of it too, and this terrible imperative for politicians to have to raise money, especially members of the House who have to run every 2 years. That's just crazy. All they're ever doing is doing campaign fund events. They'll hardly have any time to do anything else. But that would be another thing, would be term extensions for House members. I think 4 years would be reasonable. I think bringing the Senate seats down to 4 years so that they're not stuck in there for 6 years. That's a long time. Term limitations is an option. I'm not sure I'm in favor of them, but it's another thing that could be done. Less politicization of redistricting, less gerrymandering. Throw down a grid, a square grid. Forget this gerrymander, these convoluted congressional districts, which are meaning to lump one party or one group together or another in order to guarantee a seat in that district. Put a straight grid down. Put everybody in a box. Whoever lives in that box is a part of that district. There are a number of, and of course, getting rid of the Electoral College, which is just an arcane anachronism, a throwover from the slave era. The Electoral College is directly connected to the 3/5 compromise in the Constitution, which gave an unfair number of representatives to slave states. They got to count their slave population, 3/4 or 3/5 of it, for representation. So it always was gamed from the very beginning, the Electoral College, and it was always linked to slavery. There was no way that there was going to be a compromise with the Constitution unless the slave states, which were already well established by 1787, unless they were going to be thrown a bone. Slavery unfortunately, was built into the original Constitution. You know, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments got rid of a lot of it, but not all of it. The Electoral College is a vestige of the connection of slavery to the forming of the Constitution. And same with the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment guaranteeing the right to bear arms. Well, forget the introductory clause to the Second Amendment is a well-regulated militia being necessary is the introductory clause to that amendment. Well, you needed militias because basically militias at that time were slave catching forces or militias gathered to go kill Indians, is to attack Indian villages and drive them out of their lands. That's why the Second Amendment came about, not for citizens to be well armed against tyranny. That's what we hear now. But the historical record doesn't support that. The arguments for the Second Amendment, which aren't many at the Constitutional Convention, mostly talk about, that being militias being guaranteed in the South to control the slave populations, to chase down escaped slaves and in the rest of the country, basically to kill Indians. I hate to put it crudely. There's a great book on that topic called Loaded, A Disarming History of the Second Amendment. It's by my aunt, Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. And I'll give a little pitch for my aunt, but it's a great book on that subject, the Second Amendment. And it's something that we don't talk about. We kind of go to another place when we're talking about the Second Amendment. But I got off track a little bit, but there's another really great book by a guy from Texas A&M. His name is Sanford Levinson. And he wrote a really great book called Our Undemocratic Constitution. And he's got some great ideas in there on how to truly make the Constitution democratic. And that is, he thinks the Senate should be abolished. He's certainly in favor of abolishing the Electoral College. He also talks about, popular public funding of elections and other things too. So it's a very good book. And he also has a website in which there's a constant discourse going on where we can go out and get involved in the argument, in the debate about whether or not the Constitution is undemocratic or not. And a lot of Americans don't like to hear this because the Constitution is such a deeply emotional icon to us, but it was the first written constitution in the world, and thus it's the most flawed. It has had the least amount of revision to it, and it has what's called the iron cage of Article 5, which makes it very, very difficult to change. Supermajorities in the House, supermajority of states, 3/4 of the states have to ratify an amendment change. 2/3 of both houses. Can you imagine that today? It's very, very difficult to change. And that's if the president doesn't veto it. Very difficult to change the American Constitution. There are many countries that have hundreds of amendments to their constitutions, have revised them and completely revamped them many times, and have survived as societies and actually have thrived. Levinson talks about that too, about models that we could use to revise our Constitution. Again, that's a sacred cow that a lot of people are afraid to go to. There's a great quote from Jefferson, a letter that he wrote later in life, I think in 1814. And it was about, and I'm paraphrasing here, I could find the exact quote, but Jefferson said that, you know what? I think Levinson or Sagan puts it in the beginning of his book. Just give me a second here. But Jefferson basically said that the founders and framers are treated like saints, and that the Constitution is treated like the Ark of the Covenant. He actually spells Ark wrong. He spells it with a C. And it is neither. That the founders and framers were not saints, and that the Constitution is not the Ark of the Covenant. It's not written in stone. that it is meant to change with the times. And again, I'm simplifying and paraphrasing what Jefferson's saying, but it's sort of the idea that there's a lot we can do, to go back to the original question of how to make our society more democratic. As I think we need to go back and look at the very document that gave us our democracy and fine tune that. It's imperfect, and we all know that, and we shouldn't be afraid to change it. The idea of originalism or strict constructionism, of abiding by a constitution that was written in 1787, when women couldn't vote, when blacks certainly couldn't vote and weren't even considered citizens, weren't even really considered human beings, Native Americans couldn't, and everybody who was at that constitutional convention in 1787 was from elites. There wasn't a blacksmith there, or a sailor, or even a farmer, or a merchant. They were all former officers in the Continental Army. They were lawyers, or they were public office holders, or they were planters. They were rich, like Madison and Jefferson and Washington. Of course, Jefferson was in France. He wasn't at the Constitutional Convention. But this is a document of elites. And it worked well for the time. And it's amazing that elites built in as much democracy as they did, grudgingly. The Electoral College is a grudging, it is an attempt to try and forestall democracy, and democracy is not mentioned once in the American Constitution. They were afraid of it because what they were seeing, how democracy was being practiced in France by beheading their monarch, by regicide. And so we have to kind of, as I said about listening to each other, we also have to be willing to tweak our founding documents and ideals, to look at them anew, and it can be made better. And that is the progressive ideal. That's why we're different than conservatives. Conservatives believe in not changing a thing, or digging in your heels and changing it as little as you can get away with. Progressives plow on. Let's change it. And that's scary. It is scary, but it sort of needs to be done. I think it is it's a matter of growth as a society, as a democracy. I think it will only make our democracy better. But those are some of my ideas.
Thank you. Okay, Farhana has her hand up. Go ahead,
Farhana.
Hello. Oh, hello, Kurt. Thank you for
Hi,
sharing.
Farhana. Sure.
Hi.
Hi.
So I'll put my hand down and I'll ask my question. So I want to go back to something that you were saying earlier, Kurt. You were talking about, I'd rather be kind than right. So I'm recognizing that this is a predominantly white space. And I'm asking this question as a person of color, that, that seems to be something that might be a privilege. If you are white and you are not under attack for your religion, in my case, I would be under attack for being a foreigner, a Muslim in this country, a woman of color, and so forth. And so for me, when those attacks come from the right, it's threatening to my life. And as I've shared with you, I have had my life threatened, right, by people who are that way inclined. And I mean, you know better than anybody what all I go through at the college. So one of the things that I want to also say is that when I see my white friends doing the kind but right thing, for me, I just see that as white solidarity. This is what white solidarity looks like, because what we know is that when you, as a white person, try to destabilize white supremacy, it is socially and professionally costly, right? And so when I see that white solidarity, white people kind of, well, if they're trying to be kind and not right, then I read that as complicity. And I read that as a betrayal.
Well, Farhana, that is a really, really good point. And that is another one of those things that we're afraid to talk about. We're afraid to look at the defects in our own system politically. We're afraid to look at the defects of the founding document and the Constitution. And we're afraid to look at the founding environment, the context in which the Constitution was created, in which millions of people were owned by other people, and a system that was maintained for 87 years until it took a traumatic, a cataclysmic event to overturn that. And it only overturned the legality of slavery. It didn't overturn the racial attitudes that, of the founding, and that was built into the Constitution. And what you're talking about, white privilege, we don't want to talk about that. It's uncomfortable to many whites, and I think that's another conversation that we have to have. And you know, it's hard enough to break through on some of the basics of political differences, and trying to be kind rather than right, and listening and having that conversation. As you well know, race, which I think is essential that we talk about, and the white, the white supremacy and the white privilege that is built into the very system, politically, but also economically. The United States would not have progressed as an economic and industrial power that it came to be without the free labor of millions of slaves for decades and decades. And then the cheap labor of ethnic minorities who were in a state of essentially quasi-slavery under Jim Crow for blacks, for Latinos, and that still do the bulk of menial labor for very little compensation. So there are economic issues there, there are political issues, there are deeply ethnic and racial issues too, that it can't be ignored, that really can't be and skouldn't be. But you're right, Farhana. I mean, you and I have talked about this a lot. Farhana and I's office are right next to each other up at Skagit. And we've had a lot of conversations in this regard. And I've heard the tales. I've heard what she's had to put up with, you know, as a woman teacher of color. And I just said to the dean here recently, you know, and others, I don't do anything any differently than Farhana does. I teach justice. I teach an awareness of white privilege. I teach about white supremacy and race in American history. And as I said earlier, and I go at it with a meat axe. I don't play nice with it. I tell it like it is, and I bring my evidence to bear. And then we can have that argument if you want, whether you agree with it or not. But Farhana does that too, but she gets excoriated. And she gets complaints from students because she's not me. She's not a white guy. A privilege that I enjoy. I'm practically bulletproof in that regard. And I can criticize white privilege and race in American society and get away with that. I don't seem to have a dog in that fight because I'm white. Things fall down on Farhana's head. She really has to take crap, because she's saying the same things I am, and it's not fair. And we are doing our best at Skagit to try and have a protective environment where she can do the good work that she's doing, the same work that I'm doing. And it's difficult, it's not easy, but it has to be done. And as I said earlier, I'm lucky in that I have a classroom environment where I can teach these things. I can get them out there without interference from having to argue with people who are offended because I'm bringing a white privilege. It's a learning environment, and I take advantage of it, and so does Farhana. And as to, you know, what you said, Farhana, about it's sort of complicit. It makes all whites complicit in when we start agreeing with each other. I can see that. And when we hold back to get in an argument with that redneck uncle who's saying the N-word, I say, well, I don't want to make a big deal, a big fight at the family dinner. You know, it's a choice. We have to, at some point, make a choice to call it. And that's, again, then how can you do that in a civil fashion? By the way, I come from that milieu. I'm a reformed redneck. I was raised a racist, and I'm not proud of that, but it is my upbringing. And I go home, I visit family, and I hear words I haven't heard in a very, very long time. And some of my relatives, my brother in particular, loves to debate me, and he loves to see if he can get a reaction from me just by saying certain words. And I'm not going to repeat those words, but, and you know, we all know what they are. And, you know, he knows it's unacceptable to me. And so we don't talk about that. And I don't know how to broach that. Again, we're here to talk about civility and how to just sort of stand down from the polarization that we have now. And sometimes I don't know what the resolution is without calling a thing a thing. And again, I would pose the question, are they asking the same question of themselves? Is how can we reduce this polarity? How can we listen to libs, to progressives, you know, and hear what they're saying? Are they asking themselves that? We are, and I think that's one of the merits of the virtues of being liberal, of being democratic. And I don't know how to force those we disagree with to think in those same channels.
Okay, Becky Fletcher has an idea. Go ahead, Becky. Unmute yourself.
There we go. Unmute. Okay, sorry. I don't know if any of you have heard of Braver Angels. They are a group that has been organizing since Trump was first elected 4 years ago. And they've been preparing for this time, no matter who wins the election. Their whole goal is to depolarize the United States. And so it's both the left and the right working together. And they have all kinds of templates for churches, for civic groups, for individuals, for groups like this, for neighborhoods, all different, with exercises and active listening skills and workshops. And it's really good stuff. And it just seems like it'd be a wonderful thing to help train we who don't feel particularly skilled, you know, at bridging these gaps, to really have some exercises to do it. So I would encourage all of you to look at Braver Angels, or I could provide a link wherever it is appropriate. And have you heard of them, Kurt?
I haven't. No.
Yeah, it's.
I have to say that I haven't. But it sounds like a good group. Provide the link.
Yes, I will. Okay.
I have it right here, and it's a coincidence. I didn't even remember, but it's in my on deck stack on my desk, and it's
Yes.
this book, White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been in 2 workshops with her, all-day workshops, where I had the privilege of learning from her firsthand, and read the book twice. It's heavily glossed and noted, as I tend to do with books that I find appealing and that I get a lot from. I was introduced to the idea of white fragility by my good friend Ernest Tutt. Does anyone here know Ernest Tutt? He was an instructor at SCAD that he taught communications. A dear friend, a good friend, who passed away here about 2 years ago, and is African American. And Ernest was very patient with me. He took me under his wing, and he helped me. I was already working on it, but he helped me deconstruct my own racism, my own inner redneck, and keep that boy at bay. It's a wolf I try not to feed. It's still there. I'm a racist. I mean, I was raised a racist. I'm white, but I don't indulge it. I don't feed that wolf. And Ernest helped me a lot in that direction. In that book, he first gave me the essay before it became a book, White Fragility, which talks about how white people just immediately get hackles up. It shields up when you accuse them of being racist. And it's not an accusation per se. It's actually a reality of American society, a deeply, deeply racist society in which white privilege is so embedded that it's invisible. I use the example for my students. I go, black people, we don't get up as white people in the morning and look in the mirror and brush our teeth and think, well, what kind of crap am I going to have to deal with today because of what I'm seeing in the mirror? No white people ever think of that unless they've got a pimple on their nose or something. For people of color, that is always at the forefront because of how they look, how are they going to be treated in American society. It varies from region to region, it varies from person to person, it varies from job to job, but it happens, and it happens a lot. There was an interesting video done by students up at Fairhaven College up at Western, and it was entitled White Privilege. And it was students of color went out with a video camera and they interviewed other students. They went to Red Square and they interviewed students as they came by, and they found an interesting thing. And all they did was ask two questions. Do you know what white privilege is, and does it affect you? And every white student, of the white students, about half said they knew what it was, and every white student said, no, it doesn't affect me. They asked students of color if they knew what white privilege was, and every student of color knew, and every student of color said, yes, it affects me. And it's just, it showed glaringly how invisible white privilege is. It's a privilege that we have, that we didn't earn, that we don't even know that we have. And it's an awareness of those advantages that we have as whites in American society that we have to recognize that come at the expense of our fellow citizens of color. And that's what Anna was alluding to, I'm sure, you know, is that it's something she struggles with constantly, and it's something I never have to struggle with. It's a microcosm of you know, of the entire country. And it's so deeply American and deeply embedded that, again, it's almost invisible. And of a certain age, boomers, I'm a boomer, I think most of the people here tonight listening are boomers, and we were raised in a different era where we were not ever confronted with our own white privilege, where we better damn well get used to it, because this is another way where we're going in American society is demographics. And this is a moment where I can say thank you from the bottom of my heart. I mean it when I thank African Americans for saving this election. Without African Americans, Trump would be in office. They saved us, and we owe them a tremendous debt of gratitude. And I think we could start by electing more of them to public office. I'm so thankful. And as a society, this is where we're going. Every demographic shows that white people are going to be a minority in this country sooner or later. By 2050, probably, for sure. But probably sooner than that. I've been teaching to that for 30 years. I have been teaching with the idea in mind that I have to prepare my fellow white citizens for the reality of being a truly multicultural society. Truly, the face of America is literally changing. And that's been a reality for a long time. Latinos became the main minority in the 2010 census, or maybe 2000. They surpassed blacks as a proportion of the American population. That's only going to increase. The demographics show that this is going to happen. It's a reality. And I've always taught in the vein of preparing my fellow whites, mostly, for that reality, that this is a thing coming, that with education, we can ease into this and make it a wholer, truer, more just society. I was wrong. It came down a lot quicker and a lot harder than I foresaw. With Trump, we got the advent of an openly racist president with 70 million openly racist people who voted for him. I didn't see that coming. I didn't know the anger would be so profound and so deep and so ugly. I thought we had more time. I really thought I had more time to teach this and change hearts and minds of Americans to be a more truly accepting and multicultural society. And I was wrong. And we have to deal with that. I'm still going to do what I do. I still think it's the right thing to do, but we don't have the time I thought we did. And it's turned into a national emergency right now. And it's created the great polarization over which we're meeting tonight. And I can only fall back on what I do. education. I think the way to forestall this, the way to mitigate it, is education and learning and teaching in our own way and listening and all of that. None of it's going to be easy. And it took us a long time to get here. It's taken us 250 years to get here, and we're not going to fix it overnight. I think that's something else we kind of have to realize. We want to, but we're not going to.
Okay, Vilit. Vilit has a comment or question, and then Patty. Vilit?
Hi,
Oh, he must-
Professor.
Go ahead,
Thank
there you
Cory.
are.
Thank you. Professor, thank you very much for your time this evening. We really appreciate it. I'm enjoying the conversation. With your permission, I'm just going to change the topic just a little bit. I am totally disappointed with these elections, folks. You may disagree with me, but I mean, the Democrats just squeaked by, in my judgment. I mean, Biden was still counting the votes. And to me, that is a total disappointment. You know, we looked all of the polls, all of the discussions, and I truly thought that he is going to sweep the country from the northeast all the way to the southwest corner. And by 9 o'clock, everything will be over. And I'm just appalled that folks just are not voting for the Democrats. In my judgment, there are a lot of Democrats that are holding back. And my conclusion of that is, as Democrats, we don't have a decisive voice. You know, I look at Trump, as much as we despise him, and the guy are making, you know, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people sign disclosures and come in and pack an arena despite the coronavirus, and to listen to him because he's saying, you know, forget about the COVID. This God will help you. You don't have to worry about it. And people are you know, flocking after him. On the other hand, we have an 8 year of Obama, which really they were great when you look at it. But after that, we didn't see this decisive agenda that can pull people after it. In a case in point, we advertise about the climate change. I don't hear an itemized item that we can all rally behind. All I hear is, well, the refineries are bad, we should shut them down. Immigration reform. I don't see the Democrats coming up with something that we can all march after. And foreign policy, Gitmo. You know, regrettably, still it's dwindling and it's there. The Afghanistan war, the Iraq war, the Syrian war, the Libyan war. I mean, you know, what I'm hoping is that this new administration, Biden and Kamala, perhaps will come up with some clear moving forward items that we can all push after. And one more item, if you don't mind. When I listen to Bernie Sanders, this guy for the last several years, he has 6 or 7 items. He continues to repeat. He says, this is my agenda, this is my plan, this is my objective, these are my goals, this is what I'm going to do. And I think these are why we all, when I say all, at the Northwest here, Corinne and I at least, we flock after him. So would you care to comment on this? I mean, just what's this phenomenon? I'm totally disappointed with these elections. Sorry, that's.
I am too. I mean, that we didn't have the sweep that we thought we would or hoped that we would, that, you know, Lindsay and McConnell are both reelected, both two terribly despicable characters now who have come out and are actually supporting Trump's intransigence and lack of accepting the election. They're enabling him again, just like they did with the impeachment. And I agree with your frustration. I had expected more. I'm profoundly disappointed that nothing really happened except for getting rid of Trump. That's enough. but for now, but it's not substantive change, and it's not enough of a change to make any difference. And especially if the Senate remains with Republicans, it's going to be just like Obama. It's just going to be a complete obstructionist body that will keep him from Biden from attaining anything, from Democrats attaining any change at all. And I don't know what the solution to that is. I've kind of resigned myself to. I have a confession. In 2004, I actually registered as a Democrat for the first and only time in my life, so that I could work on a campaign to get rid of George Bush, whom I loathed and despise deeply. Too much so, in fact. I invested way too much negative energy in Georgie Boy. And mainly because of what he did with the genocide and the attack, the aggressive war against Iraq. And so I walk my talk. You know, I teach political science. I thought, well, I'm going to get involved. I registered as a Democrat. I became a precinct captain. I became a delegate at the county convention. I was on my way to becoming a delegate at the state and federal convention until I got a contract on a ship and was gone for the summer, so I couldn't do it. And I did it by the numbers. I did everything I could as a good citizen within the system to try and change it. And George Bush was reelected. That may seem like ancient history to some, but it broke something in me that has never, ever healed. It destroyed my confidence in the American electorate, and I still don't believe. I still have no confidence in the American electorate, and this election pretty much justified that lack of faith in the American electorate. It hasn't been fixed. Something broke, and my faith in the system, and here I talk about government, constitutional systems, and law, and I feel like a hypocrite because in many ways I don't believe it anymore, because we as a society have abandoned it. Why should I believe it if 70 million people don't believe it? That's a bit of an exaggeration, but it tells you
Yes, it is.
the point that I'm at, and I don't know how to respond to what you say about our disappointment. I don't know how we're going to change 70 million people who voted for a pig, a dog, a demagogue, a tyrant. Those words aren't even strong enough to describe this guy, and yet 70 million people voted for him. We have our work cut out for us, and I frankly don't know the way forward, except some of the things I've said tonight. Listen, try not to be angry, be kind rather than right. I don't know what else. I'm at a loss, I have to say. You ask me here, you're looking for solutions because I'm the teacher and the educated guy, but I'm as lost as you all are. I'm as deeply disappointed and disturbed as you are. That broken heart that occurred in 2004 has not healed. I'm still there. And this is why I'm not quite as emotional about Trump as I was with Bush, because I don't have despair. I can't go there again. I can't hate somebody twice that much in my life. It'll kill me. It'll eat me alive. So I try not to go there. I actually shut down a week before and after the election. I've only come back into it to protect myself. Little confession.
Corinne,
Thank you.
Patty has a question. What, Brad?
I wanted to have my hand up. I can't do that as a host. I
Sure, go
wanted you to
ahead.
call. I wanted you to call on me.
You want me to call on you before Patty? I think she's had her hand up a long
Oh,
time.
go ahead.
too.
Yeah. You can
Okay,
play-
right after Patty, Brad.
Okay.
I just have a couple of statements. One is
Oh.
check out the White Privilege Conference, WPC. It's on Facebook and online, run by Eddie Moore. It's been around since the early 2000s. And the other one is the League of Women Voters of Washington State have a civics textbook. You can read it online at the League of Women Voters of Washington. And it's called The State We Are In, Washington. And it also has tribal, local, and state and federal governments, and all the things in between.
Sounds
Okay,
good.
thanks, Patty. All right, go ahead,
Okay.
Brad.
Are you done, Patty?
I think she's done.
Corinne, my apologies. I have not been doing my job as your host managing these hands. Did Valit say what he wanted to say? I think so.
Yes, he did.
Okay, so Becky's hands down. Did Nan Monk have a chance to speak?
Well, I didn't see Nan Monk's hand.
Yeah, Nan and Aaron and Don Ambrose and Marshall Goldberg has all their hands up. But since I'm
Oh, I'm
speaking,
sorry.
I wanted to speak to Kurt's insight there a little bit, in that I think we should recognize that part of the hedge that's used is to discourage us, to remove hope from our political instincts and our instincts to do things constructive together. And it's with that full realization that I have significant fortitude to keep going, in knowing that their hedge is to make me feel confused and hopeless. I find that I can kind of crystallize hope out of that, to have fortitude to keep moving forward, keep building, keep working to understand and to build relationships. I think it's similar to what the conservatives fundamentally do. They tear down our government, make sure programs don't work, and then point at them and say government doesn't work. They do that consistently. That doesn't mean government can't work. It means that one of their primary hedges is to make it so it does not work, because then they justify getting rid of it.
Yep.
And so I think we need to call a spade whenever we can, accuse them, I put that where it belongs, and in kind ways, and to move forward. To speak a little bit to what Farik said earlier, I might have mispronounced her name.
Rahana.
I totally get what she's talking about with not, feeling like we do have the luxury as people who, I as a white man have that privilege to say, be nice when somebody who's colored wouldn't. I mean, it's outrageous, the things that we see, but I as a white privileged person strive to understand that fabric of white privilege, and to operate out of it, to try to dismantle it, to try to make it so that we're living in an egalitarian society, and very, very consciously build the skills to raise awareness and bring and to build justice and equality, and to challenge people in ways that are effective who are racist. I have friends that I'm terribly frustrated with, that I still call friends, but it's only out of the hope of finding ways to show them how their racism is wrong. And I'm honestly very conflicted about the people who are in my life that are of color, wanting to protect them from people that I'm friends with that are racist. And it's I haven't been in this space until Trump, but it's a terrible thing. It's very difficult, but it's bringing conscious and forward an opportunity for us as progressives to actually grapple with the dragon, to be able to put a name on it and go, that with Trump, I see that it's racism, and that's not me, and that's not America, and it's wrong. So, I mean, there's a silver lining in that what has been beneath the surface is now above the surface, and we can fight it. We can pass laws. We can do the work of encoding in law the injustice, the things that make injustice much harder to do. So anyway, I hope that is somewhat inspiring for you, Kurt.
Well,
Thanks, Brad.
it is in a way, and we all are dealing with this in the best way that we know how, and trying to embrace hope and the idea that there can be substantive and just change. I'm lucky. I'm really lucky in that I have my students. I have a place that I can go and vent a lot of this hope and frustration and make it a learning experience. And I've actually told my students that I would be in utter state of depression and despair if it wasn't for them. Bless their hearts, they're still open to ideas of equality and justice and all of those things that, as an Americans, that we embrace. I'm really lucky that in a way they have been lifesavers for me. Those students, those sweet students who hear it. A lot of them hear it. I've got some that don't, and some that are very resistant. Anna can tell you that. But by and large, the hope is with them. We're moving on. We've done what we could, or the damage that we could, and I think there is hope. But I still think of those 70 million, who voted for Trump, and I have to disagree with you that it's not about Trump. There was a commentator on TV. Somebody sent me the link, and I can't recall the guy's name, but he was going on a rant on national TV. I think he was on MSNBC or maybe CNN. It was a black man who was just saying, "This isn't Trump. There's 70 million people voting for this guy. It's more than one man. That there's something really deeply wrong with American society when almost half of the electorate can vote for somebody who is so despicably and open racist and many other things." And that's discouraging. But nevertheless, I have to say I'm lucky. I cling to the idea that I can change a few hearts and minds in the classroom. It's been a lifesaver for me, and I don't hesitate to do it. I've had an argument with colleagues a number of times because they know how I teach and they know how I teach it, or they know what I teach and how I teach it. In fact, at Skagit Valley College, we have learning communities where classes are combined, different disciplines. So I've taught with music teachers and English teachers and a number of different combining courses. So I've had teachers in the classroom that actually see what I do and how I do it. And I've had a few of them, they basically like what I do and agree with it, but they'll say, "Wow, that's awfully strong though, you sure didn't cut them in a break there." And I just say, that's just the way I do it, that I don't have time for niceties, for subtleties, and you're not gonna have change unless you really challenge the injustices that are already there. Otherwise, it's just window dressing. And I tell my students, and I've told these colleagues, I said, neutrality is an illusion. It is an illusion. There's no such thing. There's no, as the historian Howard Zinn said, no one's neutral on a moving train. Everyone's moving, and it's neutrality, I think, is a cop-out. And I have to fall back on what, who was it I heard say it the other day? Oh, Stephen Colbert. He said that for evil to prevail, he was quoting Edmund Burke, the great English statesman, conservative, by the way, who said that all that evil needs to do to prevail is for good men to do nothing. Neutrality is dangerous, and it's an illusion. So again, how do we challenge injustices and at the same time not increase the polarity? That's a conundrum. I'm not sure I have a resolution to.
Okay, it's 18 after 8, and we still need to hear from Nan Monk, Aaron Katz, Marshall Goldberg, and Don Ambrose. And I'm not sure in what order I was listening instead of scrolling. So whichever one of those was first, go ahead.
Hi, my name's Nan. Hey, thank you so much, Kurt, for hosting and not hosting, but my mind is kind of foggy because of the time of day. But I do have a couple questions. And, you know, I live.
Brad, she's lost her audio.
Dan, you're muted.
Oh, sorry.
Bigger,
Hi.
can hear you.
Thanks, Kurt, for being here tonight and talking about the subject.
You're welcome.
I'm a citizen of Skagit County, and I kind of see myself as a blue island in a red ocean. And I have lots of Republicans for neighbors. And I am really interested in wanting to know how to set up a civil discourse group with my neighbors, because I really believe in the value of people caring for each other in our communities. And I feel like there's a lot of social distancing, not just because of COVID, but because of the polarities. So that is one question. Has anybody done that, or how would I even start something like that? And then the second question, which I think is a bigger question, is something that you said about the violent history of our country, and that we have never really been a true democracy. And the polarity was there from the very beginning. You know, in fact, I saw a little graph today that said, you know, that there's as much polarity now as there was at the time of the Civil War. So how do we heal that? How do we heal our history? You know, I think we have to go back to the beginning somehow and find a way to repair the history in order to face the racism and the elitism and the empire mentality that was so destructive in the very beginning of our country.
Excuse me, Nan, let's let Kurt answer the question.
Okay.
Because we've got three others waiting.
Yeah. I'll be brief too, because there are other people, but I think pretty simple is to know that history, is to educate ourselves. And if you're going to be meeting with other people of diverse ideas, is to set some ground rules, you know, that it's going to be civil and that any incivility will not be tolerated. So the people really are listening to each other. And I think that's where you can get the education in. You know, I, as a historian, I'm always on. My friends are constantly accusing me of lecturing them. And my old man was the same way. He was a teacher. He was always on. But I think education and knowing our history goes far in understanding where we're at now.
Okay, let's go on to, was it Aaron or Marshall or Don Ambrose next?
I'll go next. I'm a newbie in this group, relatively speaking. My wife and I moved here about a year and a half ago to Anacortes. And I just want to state my solidarity with Kurt. I'm a retired faculty person from the School of Public Health at the University of Washington, and appreciate the work that you're doing and the struggles that you and your colleagues have in dealing with this issue. I just want to raise the one thing I haven't heard here. One of the, I would say, challenges that we have is not only are we bifurcated in terms of our political views, but we're bifurcated as to where we get our understanding of what reality is. Mm-hmm. So this isn't just about, this is a great conversation about that's incorporated white privilege and acknowledging the racism of that's the basis of our country. but there's a wide swath, and I would say a pretty large percentage of that 70 million people who voted for Trump who aren't even close to understanding, much less accepting those realities. So to have civil conversations, we have to get to a point of being able to acknowledge a common set of information that represents, quote, reality. And to me, that's a very, very big challenge today. Because I mean, I have a neighbor down here who flies his Trump flag, and he doesn't read the New York Times or the Washington Post or anything close to that. He reads, the periodicals that report on the latest information about QAnon. So this is a very large chasm for me to have a civil conversation with him about race. Phew, that's a very big, very big, very big chasm. So just wanted to lay that information base is a very big problem for us.
Well, I was expounding upon it before the meeting actually started at 7. I got involved in the discussion. I was talking about information and about social media and how there have been a number of studies now. The science is starting to come out on how we operate, how the brain actually works, and how that is reflected in human behavior when we get certain information sets and where we get it. A number of social media originators, people who develop these platforms and these systems, don't let their kids get near a screen. They say it is pernicious, is that it's appealing to a very, very sort of lizard brain, deep element of humanity that pits us against each other. Very dangerous, and it's designed that way. The algorithms are designed to appeal to a certain person, and once that person starts watching it gives them more and more of the same thing that feeds into that. I grew up in Nevada. I grew up in a gambling town. My parents both worked in casinos, so from a very young age, I saw the deleterious effects of gambling, and a lot is what's happening with social media has very, very similar characteristics to that impulse, that addictive behavior in gambling. And people get sucked into their own little world and it becomes insular. And then we just quit talking to each other. What we're asking is people to quit watching that stuff, but will they? How do we appeal to somebody, say, quit watching Fox News? That's poison. That's harming you. Those ideas are not true. But that's the source of a lot of this. And the science now is just now starting to come out on it. I think the more we understand about it, the more we can do something about it. But again, it's like gambling or like any addiction, the person has to make the choice. You have to step out of that on your own. There are resources there that will help you, but it's recognizing that you have a problem. That's a big first step. And I don't know how we can start talking to each other until we kind of come out of those insular information bubbles that are so easily accessible now. They're all around us. I go to them every day, I have to tell you. So I'm able, I think because I've had an aversion to gambling my whole life, I have a bit of an edge on breaking it. Like I said, I did a news fast a week prior, and just today, since the election, I didn't look at anything for a couple of weeks. I missed it, but I wasn't tempted to go to it. But yeah, I think that's a part of the problem. Social media. This has made the problems of division and polarization more amplified, has magnified it intensely.
Okay, Don Ambrose and Marshall Goldberg, which one of you is first? This is the honor system. Oh, Don's got his hand up. Don Ambrose.
I think I was up. I'm going to start out by making a statement, which is what really scares me here is that Joe Biden was running against arguably the worst president in a century. and that includes Herbert Hoover and Richard Nixon. We should have won that walking away hands down. And the fact that we didn't is something that we really need to pay attention to. And I've become a news junkie. One of the things that I picked up on is that a lot of middle America, so-called, has become anti-Democrat, primarily based on the fact that they don't think that we pay attention to them, we don't listen to them, that we discount them, and that we put them down. That is the prevailing opinion in that part of America. Now, I've always believed that I can only influence my own little part of where I'm at. And I've got a couple suggestions in terms of listening, because I believe, as Kurt was starting out talking about, that's a real key. And one of the things that I've learned is when you're talking to somebody and attempting to influence them, it's not a good strategy to start out by pissing them off. Don't tell them what they should be thinking. You want to start asking questions, and you want active listening, not sitting there like a bump on a log, but ask delving questions. Where did they get that information? How do they think about that? How much time have they spent thinking about those kinds of things? How would it affect them? How would it affect their neighbors? Those active listening skills are something that we can all do. Neighbors, our own family. That's something that we really need to focus on. We need to start getting out the message that we do hear them. One last parting comment is, I think we have tended to lose a lot of labor people, and that's something that is our own damn fault, and we should correct that as soon as possible.
Well,
I'm done now.
you hit on one of my favorite topics in history is labor history. My great grandfather was a wobbly, and I've been a union man my entire life. I've always been in a union most of my working life, and I have a deep commitment to labor, and I'm really aware of labor history. And I think you're right. The Democrats have embraced this neoliberalism, which Trump got a lot of traction from. One of the few things he did that I agreed with was he spiked that Pacific Agreement, that huge, it was going to be the North American Free Trade Agreement of like 20 countries in the Pacific Rim, and he spiked it, he shut it down because it was an American job killer. And I think you're right. I think the Democrats have done a lot to lose that labor base that used to be a rock solid part of the Democratic Party. And not empty promises of just restoring jobs. That a lot of those jobs are never coming back again. But is to really truly appreciate, respect the worth of labor. I think this is where I think one place where we can save a little bit that is supporting farm workers and Latinos and Mexican Americans who largely are manual laborers, and respect their contributions to society, doing jobs most of us don't or wouldn't do. And you're right. Labor is probably one of the most unappreciated facets of history, I can tell you as a historian. And it's been one where I think the Democrats, you perceptibly noted, has dropped the ball.
Okay, Marshall Goldberg, you get the last word. Go ahead. We always love when Marshall shows up.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm getting zoomed out, and so I'm getting tired of looking at my old face. So I apologize. I'm just on audio right now.
Oh.
I really appreciate everything that's been said tonight. There are two things I'm going to emphasize. One is I think things will look a little bit brighter when we start to see all of the agency heads and cabinet heads that Joe Biden is going to appoint. Because as soon as he makes those changes, we're going to start smiling again. I'm predicting this is going to happen sooner rather than later. So that's something positive for you to take away. But I want to say that I've heard the word hope, and hope is not a plan. I don't hope for anything because hope doesn't win elections. Everybody here in attendance tonight may have hope, but deep down inside, you know that's not going to accomplish what we want. So in order to have a plan, and everybody should have a plan on this call and any other gathering, is a plan to do what you can do as an individual to make a difference. And I don't care how little it is, how grandiose it is, have a plan that you as a citizen, as you as a participating member of the society are going to change the narrative that we have going forward. That means, one, taking care of yourselves. If you're depressed, anxious, seek counseling, professional if necessary. In most cases, it'll be just, looking at each other and saying, we can do better. And I think that's very, very important. Right now, I have a plan. I'm going to do something, but I'm just not sure what it is. Part of it has to do with whether we get the Senate back or not. But each of us has our own plan, whatever it is. I frankly don't think there's a lot of stock in trying to convince somebody who's flying a Confederate or Trump flag to come see the world my way. I do think there's hope in people who don't do that, who are undecided, uninformed, the people in the middle. And right now we know the people in the middle constitute 30 to 40% of the electorate. Those are the people. Identify those people, go after them. You can make the case and we can do better. Obviously we can do better. But anyway, that's my short take. And I thank Dr. Dunbar, Professor Dunbar, and everyone else who's made a comment today, because the change starts with us, right? Okay, it's with us, it's inside of us, and we can do it. I know we can, we have done it, we'll do it again.
Well,
Thank you,
Marshall,
Marshall.
good point, Marshall. You remind me of a quote from Mother Jones, a great labor leader, who said, "Don't grieve, organize."
Right.
And my daughter, who was inconsolable, she was disconsolate in 2016 when Trump was elected. And she said, "Dad, what do we do?" And I said, "Hope." Because I really do deeply believe that we can't be despairing. We have to have hope. But then I followed it up really quickly and I said, "And fight." We have to fight. Hope is not going to make it alone. It's wonderful, but you've got to fight too. So as Mother Jones said, don't grieve, organize.
And with a little bit of note of defense, I can tell you that my thinking behind hope is the belief that a plan is going to work out, some semblance of that. It's kind of like climbing a mountain. You don't know exactly what overland, you don't know exactly where the trail is or how it's going to go, but you just keep putting one foot in front of the other in the belief that you can get there. So that's what I mean. It's not anything necessarily that ethereal. It's an emotional conviction to keep moving ahead. And that's what they systematically strip us of. And we need to recognize that part of their strategy is to break that. And we need to not be broken.
I'm hoping that John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock will win their runoff elections on January 5th. And so Democrats will be able to take over the Senate, and Mitch McConnell will no longer be the majority Senate leader. That's going to be a good day. Okay, well, that will conclude, and you're welcome to stay and chat a little while if you like. Our next meeting will be Tuesday, December 8th at 7 o'clock here on Zoom. The topic is yet to be determined. Thank you, Brad, for being the Zoom host, and
my pleasure.
Professor Kurt Dunbar for being a good speaker again.
Thank you.
Everybody who showed up. Thank you. Good night.